Pnawn da, croeso. Hello, and thank you all for joining today's meeting. My name is Beth and I'm the Labour MP for Cynon Valley, and I'm going to be chairing today's meeting. Today is the UN International Day for Solidarity for the Palestinian People. So thank you to Labour and Palestine for organising today's event and giving an opportunity for Labour members and supporters to come together online to demonstrate our solidarity with the Palestinian people. The past weeks have shown more than ever why it is necessary to show solidarity with the Palestinian people and to strive for peace and justice in the Middle East. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has remarked today, the International Day of Solidarity comes during one of the darkest chapters in the history of the Palestinian people. I'm horrified by the death and destruction that have engulfed the region, which is overwhelmed with pain, anguish, and heartache. He further said, I've been clear in my condemnation of the terror attacks by Hamas on the 7th of October, but I have also been clear that they cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. And he concluded his statement by saying, United Nations will not waver in its commitment to the Palestinian people. Today and every day, let us stand in solidarity with the aspirations of the Palestinian people to achieve their inalienable rights and build a future of peace, justice, security, and dignity for all. And it is worth reflecting on the role of the United Nations. The UN presents a number of angles on the conflict in Palestine. Perhaps frustratingly, it demonstrates it is an insufficient forum to effect the change needed when faced with intransigence of state actors and its own processes, which allow the Permanent Security Council members to veto resolutions. But it's also where we see the strength of global support for the Palestinians, with resolution after resolution, decade after decade, passing its General Assembly in support. And of course, it is UNRWA, the UN Relief and Work Agency, who supply much of the emergency relief in Gaza and the West Bank and in other Palestinian refugee camps, and who have provided such vital support in difficult circumstances in recent weeks. And let's turn to those events. After horrific attacks on Israeli civilians by Hamas, the past few weeks have seen destruction and devastation in Gaza on an unprecedented scale. At least 15,000 have died, according to best estimates, including almost 5,000 children. The 1.7 million have been displaced as well, food and water supplies destroyed, healthcare facilities no longer functioning. The images of the north of Gaza, from which civilians have been subjected to collective punishment in being illegally displaced, shows homes in ruins. But increasingly, it seemed until recent days, the south of Gaza, where people had been displaced to, was being destroyed block by block as well. Truce, therefore, has been welcome. It's now 5 days old, and we must continue to strive to make it a permanent ceasefire. And we have a job of work to do to ensure that our party, the Labour Party, understands it is its role as a party of social justice to stand up for a permanent ceasefire and to put pressure on the UK government to do the same. Now, I'm delighted to have a number of colleagues with me today to express their solidarity with the Palestinian people. We've each been asked to speak for 8 minutes. I'll run through a panel and then I will invite our first speaker. Today, I'm really pleased to say we will hear from Afzal Khan MP, Zarah Sultana MP, Tim Johnson MP, Nadia Whittome MP, Ribeiro-Addy MP, John McDonnell MP, and Mick, Whelan, ASLEF General Secretary. First, can I invite Afzal Khan? Afzal is the MP for Manchester Gordon. He was elected as an MP in 2017, having previously been an MEP since 2014. Afzal is also the parliamentary chair of the Labour Muslim Network. And you will be aware that Afzal took the principled decision to step down from the front bench in order to vote in favour of an immediate ceasefire during the recent debate on on the King's speech. So diolch yn fawr Afzal for joining us. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Beth, and thank you for your kind words as well. And I am honored to actually join you all here today to mark the UN's International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people and to further echo the calls for a permanent ceasefire to end one of the world's longest unresolved international dispute in history. And thank you to Labour and Palestine for bringing us all together and inviting me to say a few words. The situation in the Middle East has rapidly developed over the past few days. Over the weekend saw emotional scenes of freed Israeli hostages being reunited with their loved ones, as well as the release of Palestinian prisoners, some of whom were children who are just now seeing their family members again after years of detentions in Israeli prisons. I was highly moved by scenes in Ramallah on Sunday as crowds gathered in the streets to welcome home those who had been released under the deal, dancing and proudly waving their flags. It was a long-awaited moment of happiness for those families, but it was also symbolic of the wider goal at hand, for an end to the violence against Palestinians and an end to the occupation. The agreement brokered by Qatar between Israel and Hamas is a crucial first step in the right direction towards securing peace in the region, and I'm pleased to hear that both parties have agreed to extend the temporary ceasefire for a further 2 days. It confirms what all of us here already know and have been advocating for since the beginning of the grotesque bloodshed that has been inflicted on Palestinian civilians for the past 2 months. That open dialogue and a full and permanent ceasefire is the only lasting humanitarian resolution to ensure a long-term peace settlement to deliver a sustainable two-state solution. The government has a responsibility not just as a member of the UN Security Council, but as a nation historically tied to the decades-long conflict in the region too. Yet the Tories are still woefully behind the UN, international organizations, and other foreign governments in their position on calling for a full ceasefire. They are failing the people of Palestine. They are failing to recognize that the global conversation has moved on from exclusive talk of warfare. Rishi Sunak is miles behind the likes of Emmanuel Macron in calling for a ceasefire and reaffirming that the UK's support for Israel does not extend to the heinous war crimes committed against the people of Gaza. The UN Relief Chief has described the situation in Gaza as the worst ever humanitarian crisis he has seen in his entire career. At least, as you mentioned before, Beth, the 15,000 Palestinians killed, over 30,000 injured. Hospitals and schools, instead of being places of curing and learning, have now become places of war and killing. These are all things a temporary ceasefire cannot fix. How many more lives will be lost once the fighting resumes? Now, contrary to what many believe, Labour is not divided on its resolution to the situation in Israel and Palestine. We all want an end to the violence, a viable two-state solution, and a long-lasting peace in the region. However, the words we use are important. I welcome the amendment to the King's speech proposed by the Labour Party, which was clear in its commitments to hold both sides to account, upholding international humanitarian law, and calling for an end to the expansion of illegal settlements and settlers' violence in the West Bank. But we must be ambitious in our calls for peace and reconciliations. We want to build a long-lasting peace in Palestine and Israel, and that is why I believe we must be explicit in calling for a ceasefire rather than a pause. And that is why I took the difficult decision to resign from the shadow cabinet as a shadow minister to vote for the amendments to the King's speech and explicitly called for the ceasefire. But that does not mean I will not stop pushing the Conservative government to take bold action to stop civilians being killed and to hold the Israeli government to account for any violations of international humanitarian laws. As we look to securing peace in the region, we need to look beyond causes. We need to get to the root, and the root is having a two-state solution and having that sovereign Palestinian state officially recognized by the international community. And I'm pleased that over 130 or so countries have already done that. More specifically, Labour should immediately recognize the state of Palestine as a commitment to this peace process. 139 of the 193 United Nations member states have already recognized the state of Palestine. As a government in waiting, Labour should not see this as a final step in peace process, but one that should be enacted immediately if we are to achieve lasting peace. Now, that's why it's imperative that we have a strong Labour voices that are willing to stand up for the Palestinian people in our continued efforts to not only move the leadership on the front foot, but because at the moment, the leadership is behind the global conversation. Yes, it's absolutely correct that we call for a pause in the fighting. That is the first step, but we are now at a point where we need to start looking beyond a pause, and that we do it after that, cautiously waiting for the US to take the lead on this issue is not helpful, nor conducive to reaching the end goal of two states and international recognition of Palestinian state. The American position on this matter, as we know, is not neutral. It is as if they are almost a party themselves. I want to see the leadership and eventually a Labour government take a strong, decisive front foot on this issue, and that requires matching the speed of the development that are taking place. We have the pause in fighting. Now we need to look to the long-term solution to help rebuild Gaza and achieve lasting peace. Crucially, it is almost means that we need to hold the Tories to account at every given opportunity into achieving a lasting ceasefire and a widespread relief for the people of Gaza. We have endured suffering on an unprecedented scale of the past 2 months. The government has a direct responsibility for the historic neglect it has inflicted on the Palestinian people since the British Mandate. We must not let them forget their role. I'm sure my colleagues will also tell you that they have been receiving thousands of emails and correspondence from constituents on this matter since the conflict began. It is now, without a doubt, overwhelmingly clear that the British public supports a full ceasefire and end to the violence in the region. Week after week, we have seen thousands of people take to streets to demand a ceasefire. It is our responsibility as MPs and members of the Labour movement to ensure that their voices are heard and that further catastrophic loss of life is prevented. The news of the past weekend has shown us all that peace is possible if all parties work together, but we can only reach that lasting solution to taking the first crucial steps in the road to securing a peace and a sovereign internationally recognized state for the Palestinian people, which is why I joined you all here today to reaffirm my support for a permanent and full ceasefire now and an implementation of a two-state solution. We no longer can afford the cycle of violence which we have been witnessing for many decades. We cannot afford to put this dispute into the court store. We now must have the crucial solution. We must enact an end to the siege of Gaza immediately. We must have accountability, and we must be firm in saying we will accept no less than a two-state solution. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Afzal, an extremely powerful speech. And as you said, we are behind the global conversation, and the voices of the majority of the public who are in support of a permanent ceasefire need to be heard, and I think they are being heard loud and clear here in Parliament, and we do need to see leadership from our own Labour Party. So diolch yn fawr, Afzal, for your contribution today and for all your work on this crisis. The next MP to speak is Zarah Sultana, who was, like myself, elected in 2019, and I don't think needs introduction. She's one of the staunchest campaigners on Palestine and is the Member of Parliament for Coventry South. So without further ado, over to you, Zarah. Diolch.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm Zarah Sultana, the Labour Member of Parliament for Coventry South, and I'm really pleased to join you today to mark the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And that solidarity, of course, has never been more needed. Israel has unleashed horror upon horror on the people of Gaza. We are now all too grimly familiar with the facts and the stats. More than 15,000 Palestinians killed, including roughly 5,500 children, with a child being killed every 10 minutes while the bombardment raged on. That's 1.7 million Palestinians displaced from their homes, and around 60% of the housing stock damaged or destroyed. When we hear the numbers of Palestinians who have been slaughtered, when we read the horrifying statistics, we must remember that there is a name, there were hopes, there were dreams, lives just as valuable, just as important as yours or mine. And it's shocking that this needs to be said, but we've seen this from the actions of our political leaders. It clearly needs saying that Palestinian lives matter just as much as everyone else's. Israel's total siege and unrelenting bombing killed an estimated 1 in every 200 people in the enclave. Hospitals, ambulances, refugee camps, and schools have all been targeted. Premature babies in incubators died as a result of hospitals running out of fuel. In the illegally occupied West Bank, where Hamas is not in power, over 200 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli army or by armed settlers, and that violence is escalating. So let's be in no doubt that what we have witnessed in the 6 weeks of Israel's bombardment are clear violations of international law and blatant war crimes. The United Nations Secretary General and human rights organizations have said as much, and we shouldn't be afraid of saying so either. And what's really shocking is that Israeli officials have been very open about their intentions. Right at the beginning of the assault, an Israeli military spokesperson said that the emphasis in bombing was, and I quote, damage, not accuracy. A former head of the National Security Council in Israel said, and I quote, the aim was to make Gaza a place where no human being can exist. And that there was also an Israeli government minister who said that the war would be Gaza's Nakba, a reference to the 1948 catastrophe where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were forcibly expelled from their homelands and never allowed to return. Yet, in spite of these terrifying, frank, open declarations of inhumanity, our political leaders have been unequivocal in their support for Israel's actions, giving a green light to Israel's slaughter of Palestinians, and made us, the British people, complicit in these crimes. That is why, with colleagues on this call, I've been doing everything that I can to push the government to use its influence to end this carnage. From marching with hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of London, with actions taking place in every part of the UK, in Wales, in Scotland, everywhere, demanding our leaders listen to the people of this country, where we've already seen polls show an overwhelmingly, the large majority of people back a ceasefire. And we've also put down an amendment in the House of Commons calling for a ceasefire. I was devastated, like my colleagues on the call, that in the vote that we had 2 weeks ago, not enough MPs supported that call. And my view on this is clear. In that vote, without a shadow of a doubt, I believe our party should have voted for an immediate ceasefire and not whipped us to abstain on that vote. But like colleagues, I was not going to abstain. That was never going to happen. And of course, I voted for a ceasefire. And as I said at the time, there is nothing humanitarian about a humanitarian pause, which allows children to eat a little today, only to bomb them tomorrow. The only humanitarian way forward is a permanent ceasefire and an end to the slaughter. And that call is backed by the Scottish Parliament, by the Welsh Parliament, by the mayors of London, Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire, by the French, Spanish, Irish and Portuguese governments, amongst many, many others, and the United Nations Secretary General and Assembly, and also everyone from the Pope to charities like Islamic Relief. The truce that is currently in place is certainly very welcome, but we know it is not enough. It has brought respite to the people of Gaza, but 6 days isn't enough time to bury the dead. It's not enough time to mourn loved ones who have been lost to the violence or to rebuild homes and neighborhoods that have been destroyed. If the truce does come to an end and Israel's assaults continue, we've seen Israeli leaders calling for that to happen, and we know that the death toll will rise, and the truce will have just been a pause in the slaughter, not an end to it. So I'm very clear, the truce that is still ongoing must be the beginning of a permanent ceasefire and the first step towards a just and lasting peace. And I'm just going to end with this. From London to Lahore, Newcastle to New York, Cairo to Kerala, across the world, we have seen a beautiful movement rise up in solidarity with the Palestinian people. In our thousands, in our millions, we have collectively demanded a ceasefire, but we can't stop there. We have to keep organizing, we have to keep marching, we have to keep speaking up until the siege on Gaza is lifted, until the occupation ends, until Palestine is free. Thank you and solidarity.
Oh, diolch yn fawr, Zara, and thank you for all the work that you do. And as a Welsh person, I am pleased that Welsh Welsh Parliament did support an immediate ceasefire. We have indeed seen a beautiful collective movement, and we need to maintain the momentum with that. Next up, we've got Kim Johnson, who is the MP for Liverpool Riverside, and I've been fortunate enough to stand alongside her on a number of platforms in support of Palestine. And Kim also does a huge amount of work on migration and is a member of the Women's Equalities Committee here in Parliament. So over to you, Kim. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'm really pleased to be here speaking on International Day of Solidarity with Palestinian people. But I wanted to start by reiterating my condemnation for the atrocities carried out by Hamas on October the 7th and the collective punishment that has been imposed on Gaza in the weeks since. The loss of civilian life is abhorrent, and in times such as these, it's vital that we remember our shared humanity and that we come together to address the root cause of this tragic cycle of violence, the occupation of Palestine. This is a time of unspeakable tragedy for the Palestinian people and for humanity. The harrowing images, videos, and reports of the catastrophe being waged on Gaza are utterly heartbreaking. The numbers of Palestinians displaced and dead now far outstrip those of the 1948 Nakba. And it is an outrage that the international community has turned its back on Gaza and permitted this to happen in plain sight. The complete disregard for Palestinian life in the defense of Western interests should chill us to the bone. And there is no justification for the collective punishment being imposed on Palestinians in the occupied territories. The latest, sorry guys, have we got a vote now?
Yes, we do. I don't know why all of a sudden.
No, I don't know why. So I'm going to have to go. Sorry guys, I'm really sorry. And I probably won't be able to come back. Is that okay? Because I'm getting a train.
Thank you, Kim. Can I just explain to those people who've joined us on the call that we're having an unexpected vote in Parliament. This is how it works here in the bubble. So we are going to have to pause this call. We may come back or we may have to reschedule it. So if you can bear with us, we will send a message to everybody notifying you of when we can reconvene this call. But thank you ever so much for joining the call today and for everything that you are doing in support of a permanent ceasefire. Solidarity.